Good morning, everybody. This is the Life and All That podcast. This is Christopher College Janney. Right now, I'm sitting in the Gitcho Laboratory for Neurodegenerative Research on the campus of Delaware State University. I promised you guys we would have some interviews coming up. One of those interviews that I talked about is with Dr. Stephani Davis. She's our postdoc in the lab. And I think it's an important perspective. You know, we've got someone who has gone through the traditional path of undergrad, grad school, postdoc, built a family, got married. So I want to talk to her, let her have an opportunity to share some of her opinions and her thoughts on academia as a whole, as well as being a parent in academia, building a family, raising kids, having kids. There's a lot to talk about there. I'm not going to do the tech that moves as the beginning of this episode. Next episode, I'll try to have some more tech. But right now, I want to kind of focus on this. You know, we usually do about 45 minutes for the podcast, so I don't want to remove that time, especially since I'm taking up Dr. Davis's time. So without further ado, I'll have her kind of tell us a little bit about herself. So Dr. Davis, tell us, a little bit about your background. Where do you come from? Where did you start off in science, and what are you interested in now? Kind of what has your path been?
Sure. So I come from a very large family. One of 7 children. So obviously, I wouldn't say we were poor, but there were no college funds saved up for us. So I got offered a high academic achievers scholarship from Delaware State University. So I took that opportunity. Sorry, this delay is. So that's where I went. I started off as an ag business major and then really liked general biology. So I thought maybe I'd go into environmental science, but eventually I made the full switch to biology. I didn't have any plans to go to graduate school at the time. I was actually quite intimidated to step into a lab. I thought I needed all of these advanced courses, cell biology and all that. So I didn't get into research until the summer after my junior year. I went to University of Virginia in a breast cancer research lab. Worked one-on-one with a postdoc for 10 weeks. So mostly I did cell culture. Mostly I did cell culture and Western blotting. So at my first time in a lab, I worked with 11 different cancer cell lines. But luckily I was very well trained and guided along the way, so it went pretty smoothly.
So did you feel like you had support through that process? I mean, I know personally, growing up, I never expected to go to college. I didn't have great grades. I was struggling through school. I had, personal things, but I also, from a familial perspective, we also didn't have the kind of like, oh, we have a fund here. It was kind of expected that if you really want to go to college, you need to figure it out. And so did you have family support in that way to say, let's help guide you there?
I had an older sister, and she had some scholarship. It wasn't enough. It didn't cover housing and all that. And my mom actually went to work for the first time. She started working at Avon. And it increased our family income, so she actually lost her funding. So she was kind of a bit resentful to my mom for basically working to lose that money. So I knew if I wanted to go to school, I had to have a scholarship. Wasn't comfortable with the idea of just racking up student loans, and I didn't even know that people did that at the time. I just assumed you had to have money or some savings to go to school. So, but basically there wasn't any high expectations for me. There weren't any college graduates in my family. So I was encouraged to do something simple like art education, definitely nothing science related.
What about by teachers? Did you have teachers that supported you with the idea of science? I mean, because I think that
Actually,
one of the discussions...
one memory that stands out to me, we had someone doing their student teaching. It was an older lady, so not a traditional student teacher that you would imagine. But on her last day, she told me, this was just general biology. She said, "You're really talented." And I had no idea. I kind of slept through class and didn't really try very hard. So that wasn't, if she hadn't told me that, it wouldn't be something that I considered. But just her pointing that out to me, because you don't really talk about your grades and compare yourself to other kids.
But
so
beyond
I didn't
that,
know I was doing better than other people.
for like math and science, was there ever any expectation that, this could be a path for you, or was it something you kind of came upon yourself, or how did that work?
In our assembly for thinking about your future, we were pretty much encouraged to do teaching or nursing. Those are the only two things. They said those are always in high demand. That's what you should pursue. And honestly, probably 90% of the females that I graduated did teaching or nursing.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a current discussion, and I know for a lot of people on Twitter that I follow and that also follow me, a lot of the discussion is around how there, in a lot of cases, there are a lot of females in the STEM field, or at least in a lot of the programs, and I think that women generally have more advanced degrees than what men do, I mean, statistically. Yeah. However, the thought process goes, and the way that it's discussed and the way that it's positioned, I think, is that it's a very male-dominated field, and I think a lot of times women are not encouraged early on to pursue those. Yeah. And I think that has to be increased. I mean, what do you think about that? I know you have 3 boys, and we'll get to the family piece in a minute, but or you're going to have 3, and so to you, I mean, as a female, if you had a daughter, I mean, how important is that? And do you think that that's happening right now? Do you see that happening where the conversation is really happening around increasing women in STEM?
Yeah, so actually when I first got into this Mark Scholarship program when I was undergrad, I was considered a minority because I was a female. Now that's not the case because they say it's 50-50 in science, but I got to take full advantage of that as an undergrad, and so I was...
I'm sure that was at least a little helpful.
Yes, it was a really awesome program. They helped you with your graduate school applications or summer research applications. They brought in speakers from all different colleges, so that definitely helped me out. But also just when I went to UVA, the PI there was a female, so that was encouraging. And one of my professors that I was close to and worked in her lab, she seemed very well-rounded, which I didn't think was possible. I knew there were female scientists, but in my mind, I just thought that they probably had no family life, that their lab was their whole life. But I was fortunate to come across Dr. Van Golen here at Delaware State University, and she ran 5 miles every day. She had students that were active in dance class that she participated in as well. She taught genetics and neuroscience, and she had a lab with some master's students. So it was the first time I really saw that it was possible to have some sort of family life balance and a career in science.
Well, that's a good segue. So before I even get into this next piece, I just want to remind everybody that's listening. So anybody that's out on Twitter, you can tweet at NeuroMuslim. It'll come up in my notifications, and then I can ask questions. We can respond. So definitely feel free to join in the discussion if you have comments, if you have questions, if you want to just give your own ideas or experiences. You can also chat directly through the program here that we have for the actual podcast. So there's lots of ways to get in touch. You can also email me for anybody that doesn't have it. It's christophermjanney@gmail.com. So don't hesitate to jump in and be a part. We definitely want to have you as a discussion. So I want to go back to this idea of the family balance. I mean, I know that, so for myself, for those that may not know, I went a very non-traditional route. I didn't go into college immediately. I went in the military. I was kind of in and out of trouble as a kid, so I didn't really think I had any other option in the military, like it is for so many. seemed like a good option, and it gave me a chance to travel. So it was like, this is cool. Um, I did that. I was in the Navy. I then went into corporate life, and a couple different things. I tried out being a chef for a little bit, and I found out I didn't like getting yelled at all the time by somebody who just wanted to throw plates at me. I didn't like the issues that we had in the kitchen, things like that. It was just a nasty environment. So I didn't actually go back and do school until I was like 27, and by that point I already had my first child, and we were going through the downturn. It was the economic kind of upheaval. We had just started to get over that hump. It was getting into, I think, 2010, beginning of 2010, middle of 2010, before I was really involved in school, and I just haven't stopped since. In your case, I know that you went a little bit of the more traditional route, right? You went undergrad and then grad school, now postdoc. Right. So going through that, you've gotten married, correct? You're in the process of that. You've done internships. You've been to multiple different programs, because you did undergrad here at Dell State, and then you did your PhD at Rutgers in the Cancer Center, I believe. Is that correct?
My lab was at the Cancer Institute in New Jersey.
Cool. And then your postdoc here, right? Yeah. So in the process of this, you've gotten married. You've now had 2 boys already, and you're
8 months pregnant with a third boy. Yeah.
So you've now had to go through all of this, and I think that this is obviously it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So what is that like? Do you feel like you have that balance, and what are the challenges, and do you think as a whole that academia recognizes that?
It's very challenging to balance your time, especially when you have kids. Before kids, it was a bit easier to manage, but so I got pregnant towards the end of my thesis, and it was a surprise pregnancy. Catholic calendar failed me. So I was wrapping up my research at Rutgers, and I needed to start looking for postdoc positions. My husband, we got married the year before, but we had actually been together since high school. So he had some difficulty finding a job in physical education, and he was really excited about his job opportunities. So I was somewhat limited to where I could go, with my marriage, and because we had a child on the way. So I was looking for something in Delaware, and there isn't a whole lot in Delaware. There's University of Delaware, Delaware State University mainly. So I was really fortunate to come across Dr. Gitcho's lab. He seemed like a really bright new scientist, and he showed me around. He had all these amazing ideas and showed me all of this equipment that we had access to. So instantly I knew that's where I wanted to go. It was only 15 minutes from my house, and seemed like a good fit for me. So I made the jump from cancer research to Alzheimer's disease research, but the biochemistry and the molecular biology is very similar between the two, so it wasn't that difficult of a transition. The hardest part was on my interview. I was, at the time in my pregnancy, I was going through some pretty extreme nausea and vomiting. And I
wasn't something you could just turn off.
Yeah, I wasn't medicated yet, so for that day only, somehow these C-bands on my wrist worked to suppress the nausea. So I got through this interview that went from 8 a.m. till like 5 p.m. Without vomiting. I don't know if it was the adrenaline or what that helped, but I got through the day. It came back the next day. But so I had to hide. I felt that I needed to hide the fact that I was pregnant in order to secure my position in the lab. Whether or not he would have still hired me knowing that I was pregnant, I'm not sure, but it wasn't something that I wanted to risk. So that kind of put our relationship at a rocky start, I think. But I needed to look out for myself.
No, and I think that that's an important point. I've, having come from a consulting background and talking with people, especially from a more HR perspective, I think that there's every reason that in the current environment, that regardless of the organization, regardless of the situation, that women feel almost like they're marked if they're pregnant, and it's like, right, look, this is a natural part of life, but you're going to hold it against me. And I know that there's been studies on this, there's been papers and papers and papers on this, there's been discussions everywhere. I just don't think it's heard enough. And I also find it interesting because as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, if as a guy, let's say I'm sick, and I can say, look, I'm sick, I can't come into the interview, and I can reschedule. But you can't say, hey, I'm pregnant and I'm not feeling well, I need to reschedule.
No.
People don't understand that the same way. I don't quite understand that. I think that's a societal flaw, cultural flaw that we have at this point. But I definitely think that that's something that it has to be talked about more.
It's all about their grant money too, and they don't want someone to spend time away from the work that they need done for their grants and to get their publications and reach their own milestones. So it's completely understandable. It's not fair, but it's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, I could understand that. I think I disagree slightly, because I think that even from a grant perspective, I would like to see a bit more understanding of the human side of things, right?
Yeah.
Things are going to happen. People are going to have things that come up. They're going to have issues. You can't, if I were to get cancer and I'm there and I have to take time off to go get chemotherapy, or I have to go to do something else, that's understood. It may not be preferred, but it would be more understood than someone who's pregnant sometimes.
Yeah, there's definitely a double standard too that I've seen in the field in general. So having a baby is an inconvenience, but a foreign postdoc or tech, it's perfectly acceptable for them to go home for a month every year.
Right.
That's fine.
I've seen that too. I mean, in the corporate world, one of the experiences I had was contractors that worked for the company that were on H-1B visa. One of the components of their contract was that they got a month paid to go back. But at the same time, in that case, we would have, thankfully, fairly liberal leave for pregnancy, but there were still challenges.
Yeah.
It still wasn't necessarily the same thing. That person who left for a month to go back and visit India, it was like a month or 2 months, something like that, every year, they weren't worried about whether or not their job was still there when they came back because it was part of their contract.
Yeah, and actually, so the time I was pregnant, there's another pregnant postdoc here, and so when she went away on maternity leave, she was actually told during that time that there was no more funding, so she didn't have a job to come back to. So it was a fear of mine, but luckily, I knew Dr. Gitcher well enough that he wouldn't do that to me. And something that dampened the pain of me going on maternity leave 5 months after I started my position was that since I hadn't been there for very long, I actually didn't qualify for any maternity leave, any paid maternity leave. So even though my sick and vacation days had accrued, I wasn't allowed to use them. So I had 8 weeks off, none of it paid. So I think I had short-term disability for 3 days. That's all I qualified for, because they only let you take it for up to 8 weeks.
So probably a little challenging.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing it takes more than 3 days for you to feel 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been through, I have 3 kids, right? So I've been through the process of, not just the pregnancy, but then also trying to figure out about if you've got a job, and then when to tell them and how that works, when to tell them you're going to leave and when you're going to come back, or if you're going to come back. And in some cases, obviously that discussion is, we can't really guarantee you that you'll have that job. We can guarantee you that you'll have a job, which is FMLA, right? So when we look at the law behind it, the Family Medical Leave Act, it protects people to say you have to be given a job when you come back, right? You can't be discriminated for that. However, the law does not require it to be the same job that you left, which I think is a very gray area because it puts people into a very awkward position. So you may come back and it could be fine. You may come back and it's totally horrible. So, I mean, there's definitely, there's two sides to that. So yes, you're protected, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same thing you left.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting coming back to work. My desk was taken over, so I was in this little desk in the corner. And during the time I was away, all of the students in the lab had gotten comfortable asking the lab technician for advice and guidance. So I wasn't really anyone's go-to person, which was different for me because I was used to mentoring people. So I was somewhat of an outsider. I had to use time to pump. I had to find a place to pump. And because I had to take that time to pump, I didn't have time to really socialize with people. I didn't have time to take lunch breaks with someone and just, be a part of the community here. I was pretty much isolated during that time.
That's not the first time I've heard that either. I mean, it's also, as a Muslim, I find it really difficult to find some place to go pray, right? To just be like, I'm going to take the time. It takes me 15, 20 minutes to go and, do my ablution, and then go and pray. And I'm not going to drop a mat into the lab floor and drop on the ground and try to do prayers because this is a lab. It's not appropriate. But there's no space. There's no quiet, private, off to the side space that exists. And the funny thing is, I just participated recently in a study that's being conducted out of University of Delaware. And they're looking at this kind of stuff from a Muslim perspective and saying, what are the challenges? What are the things that you're experiencing? What is being supported? What's not being supported? I think the same thing has to go for, even in the corporate world, the discussion has happened. You need to have a quiet, meditative, or prayer space for people that need that. That should be a requirement. But in addition, you need a quiet, private place that women can go to that's not sitting on a toilet trying to pump and get food for their children. That's not healthy. It's not right to make a woman do that. That's completely inhumane. But unfortunately, I don't think that there's the things in place yet to really protect that, unfortunately. So obviously some challenges, right? So overall, I mean, in academia, obviously I don't think that it's a single problem either. I think this is a systemic problem. So, I'd love to get your thoughts. You've had a lot more time in this than I have. I mean, I've been in corporations mostly. It's only been about the last 6 years that I've spent time around academia, really, 6-7 years. So what are your thoughts on the just challenges as a whole to the life of a grad student? I mean, we're talking about as a parent and as a spouse and building a family, but even beyond that, let's take that the step further, just in general.
Yeah, so the jump from being a grad student to a postdoc was one of the hardest for me because suddenly you're on this much more broader, open platform where you're comparing yourself to other postdocs. So grad school, you have all this time to acquire skills and learn techniques and develop. But once you become a postdoc, you're just expected to know everything and to publish. So you have to really mature quickly.
Did you feel like that you got the resources to do that? Because I feel like that's missing.
Not really. I mean, I did get somewhat of that preparation as a grad student because when I came into my lab, I was sort of the baby of the lab. We had 2 technicians, a senior postdoctoral researcher slash lab manager, and a couple experienced undergrads. So I was part of a good team, and probably about my third or fourth year during grad school, my PI announced to the lab that he was running out of funding and everyone had to find jobs quickly. So everyone left within a month span, and we went through some rehiring, some new grad students coming in. So I went from the baby of the lab to the senior person in the lab, where I was required to, I didn't have someone to ask, hey, where is this, or how do you do this? I had to become the person that told everyone else that information. So in a sense, I did get prepared for that. But coming from a large institute like that to a small university and a new lab, there were a lot of organizational issues and things that I had become accustomed to that were lacking here. There was no longer an autoclave lady or someone that just collects your dirty dishes and you can walk out in the hall to a full hallway of clean beakers and flasks. Suddenly you have to arrange for all that to be done.
Yeah, now you have to do all of that.
And nobody wants to do that grunt work.
Of course.
So the undergrads, even them, they want their own projects and they don't want to spend time doing that. But it's like, how does it get done?
Right.
So working out those issues is difficult.
It's a good point. I mean, I think that we've seen that even just since I've been here. It's been almost I'm almost done with my first year, and in the PhD program here, and I find it interesting. Of course, I'm looking at it through a different lens than most because I have been in large corporations and small corporations. I've been around family businesses and these kinds of things. So I look at it from a very business organizational perspective, and I think that that's something that's completely missing from the basic discussion in academia. I don't think that PIs, postdocs, grad students, I don't think they're prepared for the fact of, look, it's an organization. I don't care whether you want to look at it as it's a lab and that lab is the organization, or whether it's the department, or whether it's the school, or whether it's the university. Like, it doesn't matter.
And it also comes from the PI, how important organization is to them. Some PIs want you to strictly do bench work and focus on that so that they can get publications, and they don't value the extra things that go on behind the scenes. So there's been times where I wanted to spend half a day for everyone's sanity to organize things and clean up the lab, but I would get comments like, "So aren't you going to run some Western blots?"
And it's hard. I mean, how do you honestly divvy up the time that says, this is how much time I'm going to spend with this, and this is how much time I'm going to spend with this, right? I mean, we've seen that. We had this semester, we had initially, it was 3 grad students, so 2 PhD students, myself being one, and then we have a master's student, and then we have you, and then we have our PI, right? So between papers and presentations and posters and conferences and everything at the end of the year, and then trying to get ready for classes this semester, and then you're teaching and he's teaching, and we've got classes. I think we're all taking at least 3 classes. A couple people in our cohort are taking 4. So very busy schedules. And then on top of it, in our lab, we took on something like 6 or 7 undergrads.
Right.
And so managing all of that and learning the systems and the process to do that, it's not part of the base of what people have been learning for the last 20 years. It's just assumed you'll somehow absorb those skills through osmosis when you go through these other labs. And I don't think that's sufficient.
And there's always a limit to what you can actually do.
Right.
So, and I've set my limit that I know I can comfortably and properly mentor and train 2 people at a time that have limited experience. So I knew, 6 to 8 undergrads coming into the lab, you're not going to be able to entertain them. You're not going to be able to sufficiently guide them. You're not going to be able to spend the time building up the trust to get them to be independent, to do anything, and you don't have time to babysit them. So
right. But do you think that
dwindled out.
do you think that the expectations are the same when it comes to men versus women when working in these types of situations, right? So if you were a man, if you would the expectation be the same? Would there be? Do you think that in general that the expectation is the same regardless of gender?
Probably not. There are different things expected from women that I've noticed working with male PIs especially. So the women are expected to be the organizers and mothers of the lab. So not only do you have your normal tasks, but they also rely on you to do things like, hey, it's someone's birthday, grab a birthday card, grab a cake.
That sounds an awful lot like a secretary.
A lot of secretarial tasks.
Yeah. Do you see this? I mean, of course, obviously, you've been in other labs. You've been, coming through the entire program at Rutgers. Did you kind of see some of that same division, or
Yes.
was it?
Yeah.
And then when you went to UVA,
Yeah,
you were in
so
labs
a lot
there.
of
So
extra behind the scenes work from women, but less traveling opportunities. So in my previous lab, it seemed like the males were selected for the bigger conferences, the bigger roles in the projects.
yeah, that's interesting to me because I guess, like I said, and in the very first podcast episode, one of the things I talked about, I grew up with a lot of very strong women who ran businesses, who were the leaders in the businesses, and I just didn't have any other expectation other than women were the leaders. And then I go into school, and most of my teachers were women. So then it's like, oh, you're the boss, you're the supervisor here, right? Like you're the leadership position. And we had, in most places I went to, I can remember we had female principals. And so it was like, to me, this overwhelming female presence was there. And then even continuing on, the only place that I saw that I was really weirded out when I went into the military. And I'll tell you why, because as I showed up, it was mostly guys, right? I went through MEPS, which is the military entrance processing. It's where you do all your medical stuff, you do your paperwork, you take your initial pledge to come in, all these kinds of things. And I did this in South Carolina, and they fly us out of there, and we go to Chicago, where we have to get picked up to go to Great Lakes, Illinois for boot camp. That's where Navy boot camp is. And it was mostly guys. And I thought, wow, okay, well, it's the military, I can kind of understand that. And we get to the airport, and there's the mix of people there. There's men and there's women, and I was like, okay, this makes more sense. Now I feel like there's a better mix. We get on the buses, we go to the base, and there are segregated barracks and divisions. So there's some that are all female, there's some that are all male, and there's some that are integrated. And I just thought that was the most bizarre thing, that it was like, right, I'm not expecting us to sleep in the same place, but I would expect for us to train together and eat together and these kinds of things. And so at that time, that was really bizarre to me. And then I come to find out that it was only recently, and this was not even 20 years ago, right? And it was something where, for me, I'm like, you just recently started combining men and women in the military? That's a thing? Like, I'd never even considered the fact that there was still anything like that.
Right.
Then you get on the ship, right? So once you get done with your boot camp, depending on your job, you might go to A school, B school, C school, depending. So I was a quartermaster, I did mine. I get stationed on a ship. I show up in Norfolk to get on my ship, and it was this big deal because we were an integrated ship, because that meant we had some female berthing compartments, we had male berthing compartments, and then there's even female officer compartments, and that was like a huge deal because, we could have female officers on the ship, and people were either really on board and thought it was amazing, or you had the old salty guys that were so angry that it was like, I don't know why we have all these women on here, blah, 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 grumble, grumble. It was terrible. And I was shocked. And I'm like, so are there any all-women ships? Because if you're sitting and saying, we're integrating, so what did you do? Any women that wanted to join you either didn't let them in, or you just stuck them on shore duty as a secretary. It was very bizarre to me. Didn't make any sense. So that was a wake-up call for me. But then as soon as I got out, and I started going back into the civilian world, the stuff that I was doing was predominantly female. So my bosses were always female. Most of my coworkers were female. My undergrad was psychology. So, needless to say, it was predominantly female. So I, again, went right back into it. So to me, to hear and think about the challenges, it seems so off base that it's like, I can't believe that there is still that difference today in 2018. We're still talking about this difference.
Right. There's definitely challenges to overcome, especially if you're a new mom. First you go through the challenges of breastfeeding, so you're waking up 3 to 4, maybe even more times throughout the night, and working on top of that. And then even as your kids get older, there's just this pressure from society to be these Pinterest moms and have like these super awesome birthday parties. So you're looking at all these themes and what you can make, and it's just out of control.
Yeah. Do you ever feel guilty? Do you ever feel like, oh, I'm giving up on my kids, or I'm not there? Because I know my wife, in the past, there's times where she felt like, she's like, oh, I have to work late or I have to do these things, and now I feel like I'm not doing my duty. I'm not doing my job. And I said, honey, your job is to do what you need to do. And if it's supporting the family by being in the workplace, and that's what makes you happy, and it helps for you to emotionally and mentally and physically be there for our children when you can be,
right? And
likewise for me, then that's what we have to work with, right? That doesn't make any sense to just be a stay-at-home mom and then be miserable if that's not a good fit for you. Nor does it make any sense that you should feel guilty if you're at home taking care of the children, and then you're like, well, I'm not working and making money. And then if you go and you're working and you're making money, then you feel guilty that you're not at home taking care of the children. Like, you have to be able to turn one on and turn one off, don't you think?
Yeah, so for me, it was hard coming back the first time, but I've learned about myself that I need to work. I'm not the stay-at-home. I don't have the patience to be a stay-at-home mom. For me, it's a harder job than being at your job.
Yeah. I've done the stay-at-home dad thing, and it's hard.
Constantly working. Yeah.
And my wife has come to that conclusion too.
Yeah.
She says, look, I love my kids, and especially from an Islamic perspective, right? So for us, women are very highly regarded. They're the ones who really run the house, right? So they make the rules, they teach the children, they're the spiritual guides for the children. They're also supposed to educate them just in general. They're supposed to help them with manners. They're supposed to, all these kinds of things. But that's the thing, is then if they are doing these things, but then they, I know plenty of women, my wife has friends and family that some are very successful. They have their business, they have their profession, and they're fine with that. But then there's others that she knows that have spent years and years and years building a career. They get married, they feel like they have to stop once they have children. And in some cases, they want to. It's satisfying and it's a good fit, and I think that's great.
Financially, that's not even an option for me. Like, with
so
my
that's the other side of it, right?
School teacher. Yeah.
So today, the dual income household is almost a requirement.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, definitely.
Unfortunately, but that's the reality.
So, but some of the difficulties comes, like, there's when they get sick, or they have these well visits every 6 months or so. So explain to your boss that, I'm just going to be late for a couple hours because I have to take my kid to the doctor. And I don't think they quite understand how often you have to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not often, and I don't feel like it's that much of a burden, but I've had comments from my boss like, oh, isn't it your husband's turn? And the fact is, like, my husband does take them to the doctors often. Kids just get sick a lot.
Yeah.
And
don't I know it?
And sometimes it's not about whose turn it is for me. It's I just want to be there for them when they're getting their shots as their mom, and I want to be there when they're getting their cast cut off. So especially since since I'm not a teacher, like my husband gets a lot of extra time with them. I mean, it seems like every week they have some sort of holiday or day off. He always gets off work by 4 o'clock, so he's guaranteed several hours with them throughout the night. Whereas me, it kind of depends on my experiments. Often I get out like between 6 or 7 o'clock. And I want to be there at least for their bath time and bedtime and spend that time with them. But sometimes as a postdoc, your boss just wants more and more from you. And they might have in their mind what it's like to be a postdoc. You're working 12-hour days every day. But I also think that as a female, we manage our time better when we have to. We're forced to. So we're not taking extra vacation days. We're not going out in the middle of the workday to get a haircut. We're not going to the gym in the middle of the workday. We're not doing all these extra happy hours. We're not watching soccer games on our TV in the lab or on our computer in the lab. Those things are acceptable for a male, but for some reason it's hard for a female to, have some. It's just not important to have that family time.
Yeah, and I think even for guys, I think it's one of those things, if a guy says that even, right? So I try to be quite involved. I mean, you know that I've been like, oh, I've got a lunch thing with either my son or my daughter, or, I've got to go pick up my other son, I got to, whatever. But these are things where I don't think as a whole, I mean, it's not even just in academia, but just in organizations in general, I really feel like it's just a point that's missed, is that even if you had to go through these things when you were going through whatever program or whatever process, I just think it's important to take a step back and go, wait a second, is it really that important for me to force somebody else to go through this process that I hated going through?
Right.
And I don't think people think about that. Like, I think that has to be more of a discussion to say, okay, instead of just propagating that same exact process, and it's almost like a hazing ritual, right? Like, oh, you have to go through this. This is how you cut your teeth, and you learn to give up everything for this. And it's
you hear from every PI, oh, I had to do qPCR at 5 in the morning, or
right.
else the machine wasn't available.
Well, I mean, like even here, it was interesting. The dean made a comment about how we needed to have a building key, and I'm for that, because there are times when on the weekend or something I'm working on a particular project, or I need to get in the lab. But the comment was interesting because he says that, well, you need to have a key to get into the building, because he says, I remember what it was like when I was in grad school, having to come in at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's when, one particular piece of your experiment had to be done. And while I understand that, I also don't think that it's necessary not to plan for that. I think they remember those moments
so much more profoundly that they think that was their entire grad school experience.
Yeah, I agree.
But of course, those odd time points come up, but it's not every week. It's not all the time. So you hear these PIs talk about that, but then they'll also talk about how good the beer was where they were. So
right.
Obviously they were having some happy hours.
They had some type of downtime.
Yeah.
So we've got about roughly about a minute and 10 seconds left. So I just want to kind of get any final thoughts from you, anything that you want to share. I mean, thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for agreeing to do this. I think it's an important discussion. I mean, I've already had a couple people on Twitter, so thank you guys at Limper Science and at Haley Norris 08. Hopefully you guys got to hear this. I also had a couple of other people that just retweeted it out, so I appreciate the support. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more in the way of discussions and comments, and please feel free, even after the episode, you can leave comments on Spreaker. You can also send them directly to me via email, Twitter, whatever. So any final thoughts? I mean, this is a very important topic, at least I think so to me, and I think to the larger scientific community. So anything you want to leave our listeners with?
So in academia, you're very much judged by your productivity over time. So you have to think about that when planning a family. You need to, be productive, or else you're not going to get certain fellowships.
Yep. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll go, and we'll have another episode soon. Thanks, everybody.